The Cristabol Colon had traveled between South America, New York, and Spain along the same route for years. But when the Civil War broke out, the Cristabol Colon soon found herself to have little welcome anywhere. She seemed to be a ship that was doomed to wander.
Hello, and welcome to the Shipwreck Archive.
Thank you. Would you happen to have Civil War Comes to Cristabol Colon?
Here we are. Enjoy!
There was no war yet, but the sides were already being drawn as the Cristabol Colon left Spain and headed on her usual route across the Atlantic. Operated by the Compañía Transatlántica Española, also known as the Spanish Line, the Cristabol Colon connected Spain to South America and New York. Having been built in 1923, she was one of the more luxurious ships of her time, coming in at 10,833 tons and being propelled with twin screws. She had the capacity to carry a total of 1,100 passengers aboard between her first, second, and third class accommodations. If the passengers had thought that once they left Spain behind them, they would be able to put thoughts of what was happening at home behind them, however, they were to be disappointed. It seemed as though everywhere they went there were reminders. This was going to be anything but a routine voyage. The first hint that this was not going to be a voyage like every other happened at the port of Havana on July 13th. Hours before the Cristabol Colon arrived in Havana Bay, the port captain gave his men the order: if the Cristabol Colon arrived flying a red communist flag, she was to be barred from docking. Captain Eduardo Fano of the Cristabol Colon knew nothing of this as he sailed towards Havana. But then again, he was also only flying the flag of Spain. This did not seem to matter to those working in the port, who clearly did not entirely understand the order that they were given, and still barred the ship from docking. It was only after an hour of being forced to keep his ship midstream that the matter was cleared up, and the Cristabol Colon was permitted to dock as normal. Captain Fano could do little more than make an official protest over the treatment of himself and his ship when they were regulars in the port. By the time that the Cristabol Colon was preparing to leave New York and return to Spain, there was news that must have impacted everyone on board. A military uprising had begun on the 17th, and by the 21st, the nationalist rebels under the command of Franco had taken control of ports of northern Spain, Spanish Morocco, and the Canary Islands. In other parts of Spain, the forces representing the Republic had put down what would have been further uprisings. Both sides were beginning to collect their resources and put order into their territories. It was already growing into a bloody civil war. The Cristabol Colon was delayed in leaving New York, but on July 25th, she got ready to finally depart back to Spain. For 3 hours before her departure, she had company in the form of around 100 people, members of the Spanish Workers' Club of New York, who marched and demonstrated around the ship's pier in support of the Spanish government. While the marchers shouted "Down with fascism," the leader of the protest was interviewed and told reporters, "The crew is left, but the officers' affiliations are not so well known. However that may be, it is entirely possible that before the ship reaches Corona, Spain, it may be a workers' ship." In spite of the demonstration, the protest was not a violent one, and the Cristabol Colon finally departed towards Spain. The first stop after New York that the Cristabol Colon was intended to make was Vigo, but she would never reach there. The surprised passengers, which included Rivas Sheriff, the famed playwright and brother-in-law of the Spanish president Manuel Azana, instead found themselves docked at Southampton on August 3rd. The passengers had not heard anything of what had been happening in Spain since they had left New York on the 25th of July. But they were soon told by the crew some alarming information. Though it was not officially said to the reporters who visited the ship, the crew told the passengers that they had been told by wireless to divert rather than continue to Spain. They were informed that there was a rebel warship that was looking for the liner, and there was a threat that the Cristabol Colon would be sunk. The British authorities were not particularly welcome to the idea of a ship with a full crew and 488 passengers suddenly arriving without warning, however, and when some passengers did attempt to land in a launch in Southampton, the immigration authorities ordered that they had to return to the ship. Rumors swirled that the crew had been instructed by the Spanish government to elect a captain who was in support of the Republic, though the Spanish consul in England denied the claim. No matter who was in control of the ship at that moment, with it becoming clear that they were not going to be welcome in Southampton, the Madrid government sent a radiogram instructing the Cristabol Colon to head for Havre and wait for further instructions. The message also expressed that the government had faith in Captain Fano. In Havre, 145 passengers landed out of the 488 passengers on board. Among their number was Rivas Sheriff. Rivas Sheriff would eventually go into exile with his family, including President Azana in Switzerland. The passenger liner had been at sea for far longer than expected by this point, and Captain Faro decided to make a run for Barcelona. Once he was on his way, he once again got a radio message from Madrid warning him that there was a rebel cruiser waiting for him. On August 14th, he found refuge in Saint Nazaire, and they were back to waiting for orders. There was something brewing on the ship, however. On the 15th of August, the crew took control over the ship, proclaiming themselves in support of the Spanish government. They immediately installed a control committee comprised of 3 members of the engine room, 3 deckhands, and 3 of the ship's stewards. No one in France was able to determine if this was a state of affairs that Captain Fano had consented to, but from that point on, all of his orders had to be submitted to the committee, who had to approve them before they were enacted. On the 18th of August, the committee approved the landing of 104 of the passengers, all people who had come from South America and Cuba, in Nantes. They were landed to continue their trip to Spain on trains, while the ship returned to Saint Nazaire. French officials were allowed to come on board to check to make sure that everything on the ship was in good order after the crew took control. But they found nothing but a crew and passengers who were tired of being at sea and just wanted their voyage to be over. Soon after, Captain Fano was completely confined to his quarters, and the crew began to plan their return to Spain. On August 30th, under the cover of fog, the Cristabol Colon steamed into the harbor of Santander after running a naval blockade to reach the port that was still held by forces of the Republic. After 6 weeks of aimless wandering, the Cristabol Colon had reached home, if not safety. The prodigal passenger liner received a triumphant welcome as the remaining 200-odd passengers and the crew walked down the gangplank. The radio operator who had navigated the ship after Captain Fano was confined was especially celebrated. The crew under his command announced that the ship was now completely at the disposal of the government in Madrid. The government of Madrid clearly accepted the offer because soon the Cristabol Colon was on a new voyage across the Atlantic, this time under the command of a Captain Navarro. On the 23rd of September, the Cristabol Colon left Santander, the port that she had fought so hard to reach. No one is entirely certain what the Cristabol Colon's orders were, though there would later be speculation. What is known for certain is that the Cristabol Colon left Cardiff, Wales, with papers that announced her destination to be Mexico, though the crew would later admit that they were not certain exactly which Mexican port they were going to go to. No matter her destination, the crew would later say that she had gone dramatically off course, and that her navigators were unaware of the reefs around Bermuda. At 12:30 in the morning on the 25th of October, at a speed of 15 knots, the Cristabol Colon came to grief on the North Rock Reefs. She remained upright and high out of the water, her bottom entirely gutted on the reefs. Captain Navarro would testify in a hearing about the wreck in Bermuda that he had come close to Bermuda to check his instruments. He had seen a light which he thought was St. David's, and then seen a blinking, which he had thought was the Gibbs Hill Lighthouse. This belief caused Captain Navarro to alter his course, not knowing that the lighthouse he thought he was seeing was actually a communications tower. The actual Gibbs Hill Lighthouse was dark at the time, having been shut down to go under repairs. As for their voyage, some of the crew would admit that their actual mission was to buy weapons in Cuba to bring back for the government of Madrid. Though there were some that suspected that not all of the crew was actually crew either. There was some whispering that the actual point of the voyage was to bring wealthy loyalists from the Civil War and to safety. That the Cristabol Colon was still upright and looked intact on the surface initially filled people with hope that she might be salvageable. A local company sent 2 tugs with the intention of pulling her off the rocks. But even though the crew of the Cristabol Colon dumped 1,600 tons of coal over the side in an attempt to float her, it was no use. When Lloyd's agents boarded the liner, Captain Navarro was not able to show any proof of who owned the ship, any proof of insurance, or any official document that showed his destination. They reached out to Compañía Transatlántica Española, but they had ceased any service at that point due to the Civil War, and they disclaimed any responsibility. The Cristabol Colon, they said, was now owned by the Madrid government. Until they could get instructions from the Spanish consul in Mexico, the British Admiralty took charge of the wreck and dispatched a cruiser to stand by the stricken ship. The cruiser also attempted to pull the Cristabol Colon free of the reef, but again, this was a failure. With the Cristabol Colon firmly aground but stable, it made her a tempting target for looting, and people with the idea soon swarmed the ship in boats to grab what they could. The luxurious liner was full of tempting prizes for anyone willing to risk it. It was later estimated that hundreds of people took part in the looting, even if only 13 were ever convicted. One man told the judge, "Why would I steal a Spanish radio when I can't speak Spanish?" The language barrier for the crew of the stricken passenger liner was definitely a problem. Not a single one of them spoke English, a fact that seems to have bred some resentment. Not only that, but neither Spain nor Mexico was willing to find a safe passage for them from Bermuda. Resenting that they were forced to feed and house the crew of the Cristabol Colon, the government of Bermuda put them to work on construction projects until, on Christmas Eve, when they were put on a ship bound for France. The unfortunate crew were refused entry to France, however, and they were instead brought to Santander, Spain. Though no one can be entirely certain of their fate, it is believed that Franco's government executed them on their return to Spain. Tired of the pillaging from the Cristabol Colon, and having given up on the idea of salvaging the ship, the remaining items from the passenger liner were stored at a warehouse in St. George's. 4 years after the wreck, in order to compensate for the storage of the items, it was decided that there would be an auction of what remained. It was an incredibly popular event that brought people from all over, and there are houses in Bermuda still that can be found with items that came from the Cristabol Colon. The Cristabol Colon would be used as training mission target practice during World War II by British and American forces until she was a shell of her former self. Eventually, she broke in half across the reef that she was stranded on. She is now a popular dive site in Bermuda, having the honor of being Bermuda's largest shipwreck. The site covers a 100,000 square foot area. The Cristabol Colon has company. A year after she wrecked, the captain of the Norwegian ship De Aristo thought that the Cristabol Colon was a ship underway, and he attempted to follow her. The Aristo struck the same reef that the Cristabol Colon was resting on and sank.
For more information, please see Spanish ship hits reef off Bermuda from the New York Times, October 26, 1936, or see our other sources in the description below.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for visiting the Shipwreck Archives. See you soon.